Well, seeing that we're about 10:05, maybe we can get started with this community hangout. So thanks, Namya, for joining us today, and thanks for everyone who's joined us remotely. It's great to see some familiar names and faces, and also some new names. I'm Michael McHugh. I work here at the New School on the Platform Co-op Development Kit, and some of you may be familiar with these community hangout calls that we've been doing, but they're really just kind of a chance to bring together people working on platform co-ops, thinking through platform co-ops, and trying different experiments, projects, getting new things started. And so we're really excited to have Namya here. She is a partner of ours, and we are working on starting a beauty services platform for SEWA, and Namya will, of course, be able to provide more detail and more explanation of that project. But just to give you a sense of what we're doing here and what this call is about today, please feel free. Namya is going to talk for about 10 minutes or so, and maybe give an overview of the work that she's doing and SEWA's doing. And then as she's talking, take notes, jot down some questions you have or some comments, and hopefully we can get a discussion going from that. I think the aim is to have the call go for maybe 30 minutes or so, just because I know everyone's busy and everyone's got things to do. So 10 minutes for Namya to talk, and then maybe 20 minutes for Q&A. If we go longer than that, that's great. We can keep going. And then we'll go from there. So I will hand it over to Trebor in just a minute to introduce Namya. But just a few quick notes for everyone as we're getting started. If everyone could just keep their microphone on mute while you're not talking, just because sometimes there's background noise or there's interference coming through, so that's really helpful. And then if you wanted to introduce yourself and talk about what brought you here and what you're working on, and maybe share your social media links or ways to connect with you, please feel free to do that in the chat box. Just write like a little blurb about yourself, and that way everyone can see who else is on the call, and they can go explore your LinkedIn or social or Facebook or whatever it is that you feel comfortable sharing. And then finally, just an FYI, I think everyone can see it, but in the top left corner, it says that these videos are being recorded. And so if you don't feel like having your video on, that's totally fine. Just turn your video off. Won't be offended. But we will be posting these on our website, and we hopefully will distribute them on YouTube as well. So just to make you all aware that these are going to be living on the internet. Okay, I think those are all the kind of basics. And then now I will hand it over to Trebor, who can talk about Namya's work a little bit and give her an introduction.
Yeah, just a quick introduction to Namya. So she's a managing director of the SEWA Federation in Ahmedabad in the state of Gujarat, which is the size of France, as I was told. So this is part of SEWA. So SEWA as a whole is India's oldest and largest organization working on women's economic empowerment. They have an incredibly impressive history. So over 25 years, the SEWA Federation has organized over 300,000 women into 106 cooperatives, and they have an annual turnover of over $46 million. And so these are really women that are working in the informal sectors and coming from the most deprived section of Indian society, who are now owners and managers and presidents of their own cooperative. And I think that's a good introduction just to start with about SEWA and Namya's work there. So she came from, studied at Harvard University and then worked also at McKinsey & Company, and with her lifelong dream being in development. And maybe Namya can say a bit more about that. And also maybe we can talk a bit about where we are at with the development of this beauty platform that you are launching. Handing it over to Namya.
Sure, thanks so much. I'm just going to put my video on very quickly to say hi. That usually sort of kills audio quality, so I'm going to switch it off also very quickly. But thank you all for being here. It's lovely to be interacting with Trebor again and with platform cooperatives. So sorry, just switching off video now. So as Trebor said already, I think I'll start with talking a little bit about SEWA, and then about sort of our work with cooperatives, and then move on to sort of what we're doing now, and especially how we're working with platform cooperatives. So basically, SEWA stands for the Self-Employed Women's Association. It was started in 1972 by a sort of social activist and organizer called Ila Bhatt, who sort of noticed that, you know, she worked with actually a cotton union of textile workers, and with the women's wing of that. And then she noticed that there was this army of, you know, informal women workers who, you know, didn't even get the sort of meager protection and rights that being mill workers gave them. And she decided that, you know, it's important to have a union of those women. So, you know, to begin with, and sort of even now, the women who were part of the union were, you know, head loaders, women who carried bales of cotton from the market to the mills, you know, street vendors, home-based workers, so women who work in their homes to stitch or do crafts, roll cigarettes, make kites, and, you know, so on and so forth. And we started in Ahmedabad, which is sort of the largest city in Gujarat, the commercial capital. And, you know, slowly we grew as a union. We're now 1.5 million women in 15 states of India. And sort of the union really works on rights, and, you know, we call it struggle. So working with the government, with employers, to sort of ensure that women get, you know, fair wages, they get certain basic social security, you know, they get sort of minimum wage and days off and so on. But very quickly, you know, SEWA realized that there's also a need alongside struggle to do development. So, and the model that we chose for development was cooperatives. Like unions, cooperatives are member-owned, member-controlled. You know, there's a board that works from the members. You know, there's this collective ownership and grassroots leadership aspect. So actually, after, you know, SEWA was founded in 1972, our first cooperative was the SEWA Bank, which was started in 1974. This was sort of probably the world's first microfinance institution that was sort of, you know, started by grassroots women workers. And I think, you know, and it was really innovative. So now microfinance is this huge model, but at that time it was sort of, you know, innovation out of necessity, right? It was this whole system of banking didn't exist, but, you know, the collective leadership and by the women made it an obvious model in some sense for us, right? So it was like, if the women's basic unit of borrowing is 100 rupees, you know, the street vendor needs 100 rupees in the morning to buy her stock for the day, then she sells it at the end of the day and she repays that amount later. So, you know, if that is what your sort of constituency needs, then that is your basic unit. So that's how this whole concept sort of came about, and then slowly we started making more and more cooperatives, trade-based cooperatives, so cooperatives of quilt makers, you know, basket weavers, all kinds of artisans. When SEWA went into sort of rural areas, we have now agriculture cooperatives as well. So, you know, over the last sort of 45 years, SEWA has helped promote more than 106 cooperatives in India, and 106 of those are in Gujarat, and they have about 300,000 members. And then in '93, there was a need for a federation that can help provide sort of common needs. So things like training, capacity building of members, of boards, you know, training, marketing, and then some research and policy advocacy. So, the Federation works with these cooperatives on a sort of on a needs basis. So they come to us and they ask if they need certain services, and then we have to provide those. And so the Federation basically helps to incubate new cooperatives or innovative kinds of cooperatives. We help support our existing members. We help them scale up, and we help in strengthening. And then, as I mentioned, we do some sort of policy advocacy. SEWA Federation represents our member cooperatives in local government to state bodies like the Gujarat Cooperative Union, national bodies like the National Cooperative Union of India or the National Cooperative Development Corporation, to sort of international bodies like the International Cooperative Alliance or SECOPA that we are members of, the ILO, the ILO's unit on cooperatives recently did a study with us. So we have to take the issues of informal women workers and their cooperatives to sort of different levels of policy making. Right now, we're incubating 3 cooperatives. So the first is a cooperative of artisans, which basically crafts women who are doing traditional Gujarati crafts of patchwork and applique, embroidery and block printing. So actually, after agriculture, the highest employer in India is the craft sector. But it's quickly getting sort of eroded. It's not seen as a viable source of income. So a lot of young women, we speak to women who have been doing this since they were kids. Traditionally, this is a family occupation. So these women learned with their mothers when they were 5 or 6 years old. So they have 15 years of experience in this, but they still are going to retail shops, to work as mall assistants or security guards, because it's just not a viable occupation. And the reason for that is that there are these layers of contractors and subcontractors, which gives them really appallingly low rates. So our artisans cooperative helps to link artisans directly with buyers or large corporations, and ensures that they get a fair wage for their skills. We're also experimenting with sort of building a community of designers. So I think there are now designers and companies that want to source from artisans, but they have difficulty accessing the artisans, and also it can be difficult to guarantee sort of supply that's on time, that happens reliably. So we're trying to sort of make almost a platform where designers can come in, explore our crafts, and then work with the craftspeople to make designs, so that marketing is not solely the cooperative's concern, because that can be difficult for our women who don't have a lot of mobility. But it can actually help them get sort of steady work, full employment, as we say, and self-reliance. So that's artisans. The second thing we're working with is agriculture. As most of you probably know, India's largest employment is in agriculture. And what's interesting is that more than 60% of agricultural labor is actually done by the women. Multiple studies have shown that women do the most labor-intensive work in agriculture, but they're not considered farmers. Because the farmer is the person who owns the land, and given our patriarchy, all of those, all land is in the name of the man. So I think one big thing that SEWA has been trying to do is to give visibility to the idea that women are farmers, that the farmer is not the person who owns the land, but it's the person who tends to the land, who tills the land. So we're working with women farmers to help, provide them technical training, to help link them directly to customers, which again, from farm to table, there is this giant row of contractors and subcontractors, which makes the farmers get very little of the actual sales price. Another thing we're trying to do in terms of innovation is to build in climate resilience, because the farms are basically rain-fed. There's been a lot of sort of overuse and misuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides that has been sort of contaminating the water table and the soil. So we're trying to figure out ways to, improve water and soil management, to work on. So traditional seeds are often, we found them to be more thermo-resistant. So hybrid seeds that come in are A, more expensive, and B, very sensitive to changes in temperature. So working on building traditional seed banks so that they can produce agricultural produce that's climate resilient, and sort of looking at how we can scale that. We're also working with the Tribal Farmers Cooperative in South Gujarat and doing similar things, promoting organic farming, building a traditional seed bank, also working on sort of increasing all kinds of disadvantages in those indigenous communities. And the third thing we're doing, which we're also doing with the platform cooperatives, is we're working with beauty workers, and we're hoping to expand to multiple service workers. So traditionally, urban services in India are very unorganized and informal. But now there are multiple digital platforms that are working on consolidating these, making it more reliable, more organized. But as we know, from Uber, from Lyft, a lot of these platforms are not thinking about worker welfare or worker safety, which is, a huge issue for workers and especially for women. So what we're trying to do is sort of organize women beauty workers and service workers more broadly, and think about sort of what kind of digital platform would best serve their needs. So we had an introductory workshop with the IDRC with Trebor's help. We're now sort of working also to do some research on existing digital platforms in the gig economy in India and what their shortcomings are, how those women who are already on those platforms interact with them, how they feel about them, what they feel are the gaps, because that is a population we hadn't spoken a lot to. And I think once we marry those two, we'll be able to think more about what kind of platform makes sense. The other thing we're trying to do with sort of digital and with platforms that we discussed was building a sort of governance platform for all the cooperatives in the federation. So one huge problem we have is staying engaged with the cooperatives. They're geographically dispersed. In South Asian women have this unique, I think, lack of mobility. So it can be hard for them to leave their homes or their villages to come for meetings and so on. That's usually our first struggle when we go to a new community or a new geography. So that's also something we're making steps, we're taking steps towards. Our new website will have a login feature where cooperatives can go and access their data, also sort of access data more visually, give information, eventually also get information from us so that we can stay more connected to them, help give them information and news that is important for them. which will overall help the governance of the Federation. Yeah, sorry, I've been talking for a really long time. I hope that's 10 minutes. Trebor, over to you, or Michael.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, such, I mean, I don't know, I had like some of the most meaningful experiences with the power of cooperatives, really, with SEWA while visiting Ahmedabad, and to see really how the cooperatives there have lifted people really out of poverty, and now have, you know, like brick houses, and, you know, really can work in agriculture in a way that they couldn't before. So it's incredibly powerful and amazing work. So thank you for all the work you are doing. Yeah, so I think we could open it up. I mean, I think a few interesting things there is this relationship between the unions and the cooperatives, right? So SEWA being a union and a co-op with 1.5 million members in the union, and well, 300,000 in the cooperative, right? Namya, is that right?
Yeah.
So are these two structures somehow coming together? Like how do they?
Yeah, so I mean, we say that the union is the mother organization. So I mean, we're all sister organizations, but the union is the largest. So every member of cooperative of our cooperatives is a member of the union, but all of the union members don't necessarily want to take the risk of being in cooperatives, and you know, they don't all want to collectivize. So all union members are not part of the cooperatives. Yeah.
Good. Well, then I would open it up. I mean, I have more questions, but I don't want to be the one asking them. So you should, everybody should feel free to just chime in, like just unmute yourself and maybe say who you are and go ahead.
Sure.
Who will be the brave first person?
So I saw Julian has written something on the chat to say that the SEWA story he's producing a French-Canadian feature film, and the SEWA story could be interesting to add on that. And yes, you're welcome.
Absolutely.
Actually, Colin, who's on this call, is also helping us. Yeah, was that you, Colin?
Thanks. You hear?
Yes. Hi, Julian. We can see you.
And I'm sorry, I just have to go because I got another meeting. But it was really interesting to hear your explanation of where you are with SEWA. So thank you very much, and thank you to Trebor and Michael to organize this call. I'm sure I'm gonna get in touch with you later to discuss more directly of this of your experience.
Please do. Yes, thank you for being here so far.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Well, Namya, maybe you could say a bit more about the platform co-op, the beauty workers, and also you mentioned some other work that you are engaging with, so that you want to also go into other sectors with that.
Yeah, so the beauty platform, the one we discussed with the IDRC so far is basically a customer-facing interface, something that allows customers to book appointments, so that, you know, it streamlines our marketing process. What I also think would be really interesting, but we probably have to spend more time and most definitely more funds on, would be something that's accessible to the workers as well. So sort of the back end of that, which would allow beauty workers to get together, you know, speak about issues, potentially access training as well in their own time through the platform. So I think that would be also a really interesting piece of work. And, we could start with the beauty cooperatives marketing platform, but also then move to other services. So, domestic workers is an obvious choice, very similar. And we have organized domestic workers as well on platforms, to sort of other gig workers as well, cleaners, maybe even women who are sort of doing gardening work or other kinds of gig work. So I think that would be an interesting, that would be a sort of extension of the same platform, so that a customer could just use one platform to access different kinds of work. That's what we're thinking of on the beauty platform. The other one that I mentioned was the platform for the federation itself, that would allow sort of the cooperatives to be better connected to each other and to the federation, so that we could, directly understand their needs and communicate with them, and which would help us in sort of advocacy work, informing our direction as a federation, becoming more democratic.
Right, right.
Can I just chime in for a second? Hi, everyone.
Yes,
I work with Namya at SEWA Federation. My name is Saloni, and I'm sort of working on this beauty platform cooperative project as well. So right now, the stage we're at is where we were mapping sort of the existing platforms that function in Ahmedabad. There's a couple of them, Urban Clap and House Joy primarily. And we sort of want to look at how these platforms disadvantage workers. Are they reinforcing some sort of social hierarchy? And we find that they are, in terms of religion and caste, and how we can sort of build a framework that doesn't reinforce these, so that learn from their mistakes essentially. So the stage where we're at is also where we're mapping the existing platforms. And I think that's really relevant moving forward if we want to create a fair and sustainable platform economy.
Can I ask a question?
Dana. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Dana, you can go first. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Namya, it's good to see you and hear you again. And,
hi, yes.
Hi.
How are you?
And Saloni, nice to meet you too. And yeah, so it was great to get an update on where you're at with the beauty services co-op work, and it sounds great. And yeah, I just wanted to ask a little more if you have any other thoughts, further thoughts about the what you're calling the governance platform. And I think we're sort of calling it a learning commons. And when we did the work there with the Federation, we did some co-design around what might be in such a platform, or and when you talk about a platform that would allow the co-ops to connect with each other and to SEWA and share knowledge and information, that kind of sounds like what we're referring to as the learning commons. But whatever we're calling it, yeah, I just wondered if you had any further thoughts about that, or what that might look like, or if you've done any other work on that.
Sure. Saloni, you want to talk about that as well?
Well, we're sort of just starting off. Again, we want to kind of map where the shortfalls are, where the bottlenecks are for the workers. And the governance platform is also a means for us to create a backlog of data, and we find that we've been pretty bad at documenting our work, which is super important to evaluate our impact. So starting off, we want to make sure the data comes from the workers themselves. And this is a very simple, very simplified sort of format where we take in information about, say, their average monthly incomes, the number of women they've employed. And we want to get in some data analytics. We're working with a developer right now to, as Namya described, we want to visually map these so it's easier for the women to kind of see where their growth has been and where they've been lacking, because this is not something they would do themselves. And we hope that by doing this, we can sort of find the areas where we need to support them further. So that's primarily, I think, the idea behind doing.
Correct. Yeah. So Dana, what we spoken about, there was the learning platform aspect of it, I think, which is also really important. But I think there's also this aspect of sort of, I think cooperatives would see a lot of value in also looking at their data, which we'd also briefly touched on somebody being able to analyze and just getting sort of a basic fact sheet that this is the cooperative, this is its annual turnover, this is monthly turnover, this is number of women it works with, which is also information that our cooperatives don't necessarily have. And then on top of that, we'd want to layer the whole learning idea as well, where we'd have training modules. But I think the first draw to get the cooperatives onto the platform itself might be better if we had this sort of data platform or dashboard that they could monitor. And once they're in the habit of being there, then I think having that learning and the connecting sort of the forum part would be also really helpful.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I can imagine eventually that data could even feed into the learning in some ways, learning about each other's co-ops, and etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One thing I didn't talk about is that we work with several kinds of cooperatives. So, dairy cooperatives, agriculture, handicraft, services, savings and credit. So like knowing how many cooperatives and which of them are most active and what they need will also help us, understand what kind of technical trainings we need, because those are very different for these different sectors. So
Namya, when you say governance, this was a really interesting sort of insight, I guess, we had earlier, where I think the IDRC team reported that the people from the board of these various cooperatives, we are not so interested in, well, Lumio in particular, but also like this idea of direct democracy was not exactly what they had in mind when they thought governance. So I just wonder if you think this is just from the board, or is that something that's more, what's going on there? So like, I mean, what do you mean when you say governance?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's more difficult to do for the cooperatives themselves, this direct democracy part, because so there is a lot of technology penetration. If you look at the statistics, a large percentage of households in India have access to a mobile phone and even smartphones, but that technology is mostly in the hands of either the husband or the oldest son. So the women themselves don't really have access to technology in a meaningful way, for the most part, right? So beauty workers, the ones you met, Trebor, were more generally affluent and perhaps needed for their work. So a lot of them do have smartphones, but domestic workers usually will not have their own smartphones and so on. So if the women can't access technology in any kind of real-time way, then it's not really meaningful for the cooperatives to at least be doing this through technology, right? And any other way would become sort of very unviable very fast. The federation, I mean, our board, the women on our board potentially do have access to phone technology and so on. So at least maybe for larger decisions like sort of strategy decisions, or if we were looking to do something for the dairy cooperatives, it could help us at least sort of decide on strategy or on issues of advocacy, right? So we could do a quick poll with the milk cooperatives, for instance, to say, okay, there is this subsidy that's available to women's dairy cooperatives by the government. How many of you have been able to avail of this, or something like that, right? So I think there are certain ways to do this, but we do have to be mindful of the fact that technology addresses some inequalities, but I think it's exacerbating others. It's leaving a lot of women even further behind because they don't have, they can't access these tools.
Thank you.
Jack, did you have a question?
Yes, actually, I think thanks, Namya, Saloni, you already started to answer my questions before I ask it. So I have two questions. The first one is about phone ownership. Because I remember Trebor telling us about, these women. Many of them are because of caste difference. So do you see there are also lower ownership? Just now you were talking about. So the women would have personal ownership. So that's is that like the more they belong to Dalit, the lowest castes, and they will not have their own mobile phone. But what about the earlier model, like the Grameen phone model? Like, I don't know, we started in Bangladesh. I don't know whether that's also popular. I think many years ago, I was in New Delhi, not far from there. There were people doing similar things with the Grameen phone, project. How about like in Ahmedabad or Gujarat? So could there be, more intentionally to give phones, okay, if they don't have, this was like more than 10 years ago. Phones are much less expensive now. So that the phone does not have to be even, I'm even jumping a little bit ahead. The phones does not have to be owned by the beauty workers. They could be co-op, collective assets. So that's number one, to increase, actual phone ownership among workers. My second question is how I want to learn more about the beauty workers app. And what's the timeline for the design and the implementation, and when will it started to actually work? I'm just curious to learn about the process.
Sure. So on the first question, so we are definitely interested in putting more technology in the hands of women. SEWA has this program of sort of internet sati as well, where we're helping form sort of groups of women. We work with groups of women, and sort of especially in rural areas, and help them also sort of decode the internet. Right? It's not necessarily obvious if you're not, if you're not very literate. It can be hard also to sift through information and understand what is accurate, what is not. So we have worked with groups of women to help them access technology. We do work, so for instance, our union membership now in many areas is taken through tablets. And the women have reported that it reduces their manual labor as well. A smaller example is that in the Federation now, our baselining and so on, we're doing through tablets, which I think helps a lot with the drudgery of data entry. So we're working on sort of technology in different ways. But I think we're also cognizant of the fact that technology can't necessarily solve all of these problems. It's still important to gather women physically and work with them face to face and collectively. So so I hope that answers your question. I think a lot of the work we do will continue to gather around offline sort of meetings, getting women out of the house, getting women to understand their position as workers and, get access to the outside world. And where, technology makes that work more easy or, faster, we do try to incorporate it as far as possible. So that's that. On the beauty workers cooperative, we're as I said, we're trying to sort of also understand what kind of platform makes most sense. We don't want to have another sort of marketing platform that, as Saloni said, perpetuates traditional stereotypes. So we want to, I think, we do have a design in place that we could deploy tomorrow, right? But I think we want to be a little more intentional and thoughtful about how we can actually solve those issues. So we're also actually now looking for capital to fund the actual mobilization and training of workers. So I think if we have sort of a couple of partners in place, then we might be looking at launching towards the end of the year or next year. But it does depend on us, figuring out what is the correct kind of platform, and B, also finding some more seed capital, honestly.
Thank you, Namya.
Yeah.
Great. Well, are there any other questions or any other comments that people would like to make?
Well, we look forward to the next steps and working with you, Namya, and with your whole team. We'll see you later in the year, and then a lot next year, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. And the good news is we'll post this on YouTube. So even if we have just 11 participants today, we'll have a lot more views on YouTube and hopefully more connections and ideas generated from that as well.
Fantastic.
Great.